Millions of us are targeted in scams every year, and whether it comes in the form of an email, a cold call, or a knock at the door, they're all designed to do one thing and one thing only: to get you to part with your cash. Coming up, how one woman's addiction to scam mail almost cost her her home and her family.
I couldn't stop. I thought, oh, I'm missing out on something if I don't open this letter. It might be the one with the check-in.
And the real-life Walter Mitty, whose fraudulent exploits were the stuff of Hollywood movies.
The lies that are coming out of his mouth are unbelievable.
Everybody that was involved was fooled by him.
Well, I'm here to tell you what the con man doesn't want you to know. How to stay one step ahead of the game and not get scammed. Most scams work on their targets when they're at a moment of weakness, when something has happened which will make them behave in a way that they wouldn't do otherwise. Mail shot scams are no different. They go out in their millions through letterboxes across the country, hoping to find someone who just once will respond. Scams of this kind come in many shapes and sizes, but organisations such as the Serious Organised Crime Agency refer to them as mass marketing fraud.
The most common types of mass marketing fraud are romance fraud, lottery fraud, inheritance fraud, horoscopes, and then any combination of those.
But they all have two things in common. They arrive through your letterbox, delivered by the postman, and they have one sole aim: to get at your cash. Over 3 million people in the UK fall victim to mass marketing fraud every year. Some get wise to the scam before parting with too much money, but other, more vulnerable victims are sucked into a vicious cycle which can go on for years with devastating results. I'm about to meet a woman who's been receiving scam mail for a decade, and it cost her and her family very dear indeed. 76-year-old June from Torquay became embroiled in the world of scam mail after a family tragedy. She and daughter Liz have been through a terrible time, but they've agreed to share their story to warn others about the effect scam mail can have on people who are at their most vulnerable. Hello, you must be Liz.
Yes, come on in.
Thank you very much. Tell me about life with your family. How is it?
What would you say?
We've been through a difficult time because obviously Mum lost her eldest daughter, Salma, in a drowning incident, which has sort of rocked the family.
When was that?
That was 10 years ago, 2001. And it was the most horrendous day of my life. I'll never forget it.
Following her daughter's death, June sank into a deep depression. You know, it's a horrible shock to have someone taken from you so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
How did you try and cope with that?
Do you know, I just went in my shell. I just didn't go out. I never went anywhere. I stayed home all the time with my husband.
And it was at this moment, when she was at her lowest ebb, that the scam mail started to arrive through June's letterbox.
I started getting letters from clairvoyants from all over the place. They were coming from America, even, to this address.
Initially sceptical, June didn't respond to the letters, but then something arrived which caught her attention.
The lottery was one of them, the Australian lottery. And there was massive amounts of money to be won.
This particular wording often includes things like, this is your lucky day, and you have been chosen, you are the selected person. Of course you're not, you're one of about 10,000 that were selected to see if you will fall for it.
Her daughter's death had left June at rock bottom, and she suddenly thought she saw something that could make a huge difference to her and her family. So she started replying to the lottery letters. Can you tell me the first piece of paper that came through your door that you responded to?
Their motto is to play the lottery with the amount of money that you feel comfortable with. Play only for fun, which I thought that was all right. And that started me off.
Older, elderly victims are more often likely to send off some money to start with because they think it's a right thing.
June began by sending small amounts of around £20 to be entered into a prize draw. But once she'd sent off one lot of money, the fraudsters wanted more, another £20 or £30 to enter her into the next stage of the draw. And now that she'd replied to the scammers, the floodgates opened.
The victim, once they've made the initial response, will start to get more letters. They will get tens, hundreds of letters a week because the fraudster will sell on those names to another fraudster because they're a person who will respond.
Within a very short space of time, June started to receive scam lottery letters from Spain, Australia, Canada, America, and she began to devote all her time to opening them and reading them.
My husband used to get annoyed. Are you still on with that? I said, yes. And it would take me all day.
In my experience, this type of offence can get to people to the extent where it takes over their lives.
When I'd get there, she'd probably still be in a dressing gown and opening a post. I'd notice in drawers and cupboards when I was putting clothes away, piles of letters.
The letters promised one of two things. Either June had already won a large cash prize, and all she had to do to receive it was send off a payment order of £20 or £30, or she'd been exclusively selected to enter a prize draw worth millions of pounds, and she simply had to send off an entry fee. June was quickly being sucked into an addictive cycle of responding to these letters. And as the weeks, months, and then years went by, she began sending off hundreds and then thousands of pounds. How many credit card slips would you be
I would
filling
do
out?
about 4 a day.
For an average amount of how much, would you say?
£20.
So you could be spending, on average, about £80 a day. The scammers even convinced June to set up a monthly direct debit so that she could be entered automatically into lottery prize draws. And June didn't have this money to spend. She was receiving just £296 a month in a state pension, and she was spending this and some of her husband's pension to play the so-called lottery.
I even sold my jewellery. I sold all sorts of things to get money to put on and bet on the lottery.
By this point, several years had gone by, and June's family were becoming increasingly concerned.
My daughter was objecting to me spending so much money, and she was trying to tell me this was a scam and not to do it. And my grandson too, he got involved and said, "Grandma, are you doing these things again?" I said, "Yes." And he took all the mail and he tore it all up in front of me and threw it on the floor and jumped on it.
But June was under the spell of these scam letters, and like many people who are targeted this way, she didn't want to hear what her loved ones were saying.
Victims who continually send money away to these sort of mailings are what we see as chronic victims. And quite often, even when they are told, look, this is not real, they carry on doing it.
And June's refusal to listen began to have a damaging effect on her relationship with her daughter. Tell me what happened when you confronted your mum about the...
She wasn't happy. She was very angry. She would say, "Oh, I'm putting the evil eye on her games, and she'll never win," with an attitude like that towards it.
Why did you ignore them and carry on?
I just don't know, just something inside me wanted to achieve this.
The loss of daughter Selma had left June with a hole in her life, one she was filling with scam mail. And the con men needed no encouragement to keep sending it.
There is a genuine need here just to talk to somebody. And getting all of those letters, whilst we might look at them and think, this is a load of fraudulent mail, it's a load of rubbish, to them it's actually contact with the outside world.
Sensing June's vulnerability, the scammers even began to call her and send her gifts.
They will be on the phone asking you about your private life. They will even send you flowers, a box of chocolates. All of this is a grooming process to gain your confidence.
Recently, I got a card from a girl who was leaving one of the lottery people, and she sent me a little package containing some soaps and nuts and chocolates and.
So the idea there is that
as a gift.
This is like a friendship now.
Yeah.
The scammers had now manipulated June so much, she began hiding things from her family.
So I would sneak the mail and hide it somewhere else. And when they went, I would sneak out and open it up and read it and place them all. And it went on like that for years.
At her wit's end, Liz decided to take matters into her own hands. She began to withdraw her dad's pension and pay her parents' bills herself. And to stop the direct debits, she closed her mum's bank account and opened another one. But this didn't stop June paying over the phone or withdrawing cash to send in the post.
Without a doubt, there is some sort of addiction here. I don't see it any different to gambling, alcoholism. It is an addiction, and people need help.
I couldn't stop. I thought, I'm missing out on something if I don't open this letter. It might be the one with the check-in and blah, blah, blah. And I was fooling myself.
June had now been responding to scam mail for 10 years, and Liz was becoming increasingly desperate. Then she discovered a website called Think Jessica, which told stories of people in exactly the same situation as June. It had been set up by Marilyn Baldwin after her mother, Jessica, became addicted to scam mail.
We tried to stop her. We tried to explain to her that this mail wasn't genuine, but she just couldn't see it. It was almost like they trapped her. She was in this fictitious world that they'd created with the mail.
Marilyn wanted people to see this footage to show the devastating impact that scam mail can have.
And do you think you've won on this one?
I know I've won it.
How sure are you?
I'm 100% sure with that. 100%.
She actually thought she was rich in a strange way, even though she hadn't received anything.
Jessica remained under the spell of the scam artists until just before she died in 2007.
I think when my mum was going through this, I would have quite gladly have given them the house and everything. They could have taken everything just to get my mother back. They stole her from me.
Since her mother's death, Marilyn has campaigned to raise awareness of the problem and help others in the same situation. And for Liz, the website was proof that she and her mum weren't alone.
I read everything to you, and we sat and cried.
Yeah, it had an impact on me when I read that. When Elizabeth read it out to me. And I thought, that's me, and I'm getting myself in such a muddle with life. And I've got to do something. And these shook me up and made me see reason.
Finally, the penny seemed to have dropped. Over a 10-year period, June had ploughed over £100,000 into fraudulent lottery schemes. And at last, she was able to see the damage that had been done.
I could have bought a house.
What do you make of that figure?
Well, it's disgusting, isn't it, really? I mean, I'm on the pension, and I spent all my pension on that, plus some of Dad's pension too, and savings that I had, and jewellery.
With Liz's help, June has now taken steps to stop scam mail.
I've stopped looking at the mail. I just get rid of it in the bin.
We've changed your bank details.
Yeah,
We've
I've changed the bank details.
been to the bank. We've stopped all the cards that she was using the number of.
And I leave Elizabeth to handle the affairs, the bills that need paying, so I don't handle any money or credit cards.
That must be very hard for you to take, though, when you've been so independent.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's difficult, but that's the only way I can do it.
I think you're really lucky in that you have a very close family who are there for you, and, you know,
Yeah,
at this
I am.
point, you know, they've been able to step in and help.
Yeah. I am grateful to my daughter and my son and my grandson and my husband, all of them.
June has managed to kick scam mail out of her life before it was too late, but there are others out there who aren't so lucky. How can you avoid falling victim to mass marketing lottery scams?
On this type of fraud, it doesn't exist. Never answer a letter, never send an upfront fee, and look after the elderly and the vulnerable to make sure that they are not becoming a victim to this. And if it does happen, report it to Action Fraud.
June has lost a huge sum of money, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. She's stopped paying attention to all the rubbish that comes through her letterbox. It could have ripped her family wide apart, but it isn't going to now. And that's all because of a bit of tough love from her daughter Liz. These days, most scam artists like to target people using email, the phone, or the mailbox. But there are those who still like to do it the old-fashioned way, face-to-face. And tales of what they get up to can read like the plot of a Hollywood movie. This story is about a man called George Schoon, a Walter Mitty-type character who created a series of fantasy lifestyles and alter egos in order to perpetrate some truly outrageous scams.
Mr. Schoon, without doubt, is probably the most eccentric character I've met. The lies that come out of his mouth are unbelievable.
I don't think George Schoon could lie straight in bed.
In April 2008, Thames Valley Police began receiving complaints about Schoon from people involved in show jumping. PC Stuart Keyes was on secondment to CID at the time and was charged with investigating the case.
As more victims were coming forward, I felt that obviously we had a big fraudster on our hands here.
One of the first people to contact PC Keyes was Patrick Riley, who runs a company which makes physiotherapy equipment for horses. Patrick had been contacted by George Schoon, who said he was the son of the multi-millionaire owner of computer giant IBM, and that he was setting up an IBM show-jumping team.
He had lots of cash on him, good-looking woman on his arm. Drove then, at that time, I think he was in an Audi Q7 4x4, nice clothes, etc. Played the part perfectly.
Schoon told Patrick he wanted to order some equipment for the IBM team, which to Patrick sounded like the opportunity of a lifetime.
The thought of being involved with somebody the size of IBM was fantastic. We thought all our dreams had come true.
Schoon put in an order for £62,500 worth of equipment, which Patrick and his wife delivered in person, on the agreement that he would pay for it by bank transfer within 30 days.
I thought that the golden goose had laid its egg. I thought that we'd had the opportunity here now to make a lot of money with some decent clients.
But the payment date came and went, and the money didn't materialise.
When the 30 days had expired, excuses started to come out as to why the money hadn't been paid. My father said this, my father said that, the lawyers are involved, it's in a trust fund, it's all this kind of rubbish. It was at this point that we really started to know that something wasn't quite right with this guy.
Patrick contacted the police, and they quickly discovered that George Schoon had previous. In 2003, he'd been jailed for 18 months for obtaining services by deception in a catch-me-if-you-can style scam involving the world of aviation.
He contacted an airline company wishing to buy a helicopter. He turned up wearing a air pilot's uniform, claiming he was a pilot for a prince in Dubai.
He also claimed to be a qualified neurosurgeon and said he was setting up his own airline.
Schoon came here to Farnborough Airspace and hired out a warehouse.
He even hired staff to work for his new airline, including a secretary, who was promised a salary of £58,000, and a pilot who was promised £180,000 if he gave up his job and came to work for Schoon. Needless to say, the jobs didn't exist. The aviation company were never paid, and Schoon's claims that he was a helicopter-flying neurosurgeon were exposed as lies. Now, 5 years later, it seemed Schoon was up to his old tricks again. As the police investigated, they discovered that he had set up a show-jumping team which had competed at various events. But when they called IBM to make sure he was who he said he was, they were in for a surprise.
IBM told me that Mr. Schoon has no connections whatsoever with their company, and they wished to have any items with the IBM logo on to be destroyed.
This was the bombshell Patrick didn't want to receive. He'd believed he was going into business with a global technology giant who could bankroll his business and provide fantastic advertising for years to come. It turned out now it was all a pack of lies.
We felt that we'd had our pants pulled down in public kind of thing, a bit embarrassed.
George Schoon was living out a fantasy lifestyle, playing the role of the son of a multi-millionaire businessman with a love of show jumping.
Mr. Schoon had flamboyant sports cars, Hummers, Porsches, giving off this impression that he was a wealthy sort of person. Unbeknown to the people that he was in connection with, everything was rented.
Schoon was living the dream without paying the bills, and Patrick Riley wasn't the only person that he'd deceived.
The second person was responsible for embroidering items of clothing or equipment used in the horse riding world. Mr. Schoon said if they could provide clothing, etc., equipment for the horses and riders with the IBM logo, they'd be paid thousands of pounds worth of sponsorship deals.
He'd also managed to deceive a well-known horse trainer, and he'd persuaded a star British rider to join his show-jumping team. They'd all been taken in by this highly accomplished con man. But once Patrick Riley knew about Schoon's criminal past, he decided to take matters into his own hands.
The main thing we wanted to do then was ensure that we got our money back or our equipment back, because it was quite a substantial amount.
Patrick Riley instructed a debt collection company to go round to Schoon's house and pick up his equipment.
George wasn't in at the time, but it transpired that the equipment was in the garage, and the chaps were allowed into the garage, seized the equipment and brought it back to us.
But Patrick was still owed £5,000 by Schoon for goods he hadn't paid for, and the other victims between them had lost around £27,000 in unpaid goods and services. So PC Keys now had ample evidence to bring George Schoon in for a formal interview. And surprise, surprise, at first, it seemed the fraudster had an answer for everything. When asked why he had claimed to be the son of the owner of IBM,
Mr. Schoon stated that he hadn't told anyone that he had any connections whatsoever with IBM, and just said that he was going to use them as a potential sponsorship.
and when asked why he'd put in a large order for equipment from Patrick Riley and they're not paid for it,
Mr. Schoon admitted to borrowing equipment from Mr. Riley, but stated that he returned that equipment, never placed a second order, and there was never anything else outstanding.
but the police weren't buying any of it.
During interview, Mr. Schoon was becoming agitated. I could tell he was being backed into a corner. He knew the evidence against him was such that these guys were all telling the truth.
And a search of Mr. Schoon's home provided the police with more evidence that backed up the victim's claims.
I found items such as baseball caps, jackets, horse blankets, all with the IBM logo printed on them, as well as various paperwork.
The police now had what they needed to take serious action against George Schoon.
Whilst in police custody, Mr. Schoon was charged with 3 counts of fraud, bailed to attend Reading Crown Court in July 2010.
Although he'd paid his victims back the money he owed them, Schoon still had to answer for his crimes. And in the dock, he pleaded guilty. He was then bailed to appear at Reading Crown Court 1 month later for his sentencing. But on the day of the sentencing, Schoon didn't turn up.
He went down to the south coast, hired a boat and absconded to France, which is the last known sighting of Mr. Schoon.
This catch-me-if-you-can con man had managed to evade his captors at the final hour and sail off into the sunset. George Schoon was sentenced in his absence to 27 months. If he's caught, he'll be sent straight to prison.
We'd very much like to find Mr. Schoon, locate him and bring him back to England so he can serve his prison sentence. So if anyone's got any information on his whereabouts, please contact Thames Valley Police and let us locate this male.
Before we go, there's just time to tell you about some of the latest scams out there. I've come to meet an expert from the Citizens Advice Bureau to get the lowdown on what you should be looking out for. Today we're looking at a scam targeting those looking for property. Landlord scams can be really cruel because they don't just take your money, they can deprive you of a place to live. So how does this scam work?
The difficulty is you can't always see the place that you're hoping to live. Maybe you live abroad and you're coming to work in the UK, or you're just moving to the other end of the country and you need there to be accommodation when you get there.
So what's really going on here?
The scam works because you are making a payment up front. But these are just phantom flats. They don't exist, or if they do exist, there's somebody already living there.
And presumably, if the landlord does it to one set of tenants, potential tenants, he can do it to 100.
And you wouldn't know because you're looking for this place online. You're not going to an office where you're meeting other people or anything like that.
Be wary of handing over upfront fees for a property you haven't seen. For extra peace of mind, you could also see if your agent is part of the Safe Agent scheme. Fraudsters will forever be coming up with new ways to get you to part with your cash. But armed with a little bit of knowledge, you can be one step ahead of them. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.